Hey, what's going on, Jellyfish? This is Tracy, and I'm doing a real talk on something that actually came up when I wasn't playing Magic. This is what happens a lot, is I'm playing like another game, and then I'm like, this is totally applicable to Magic, because if you didn't know, I'm moving, and so like all of my Magic cards are packed. So, like, I haven't played Magic in actually a bit, and you know, we're in the process of moving and stuff. So I'm crossing my fingers. We're moving to Austin, Texas, so I'm crossing my fingers that when I get there, I'll be able to play Magic and like go to a game store and all that sort of stuff. But anyways, this actually came up when I was playing this computer game. Hold on, let me adjust you guys a little bit. There we go. I was playing this game. This game's called Paladins. It's on Steam. It's very similar to Overwatch if you've ever played that. And one of my favorite characters in this game, her name's Sky, and she's like a badass like assassin lady, and she runs around and like makes herself invisible, and like she's got like this crossbow like on her wrist, and she like shoots out like arrows. She's sweet. Anyways, she's like one of my favorite characters, and one of the ones I identified most with. And I remember reading like reading up on like the game and stuff, and how people are like, she's like one of the worst characters in the game. And it was like really, I was reading like the arguments on it, and how like, oh, like this character's bad, and like here's why. And I read it and I was like, okay, cool. Like, you can totally see, where people were coming from. Some people present their argument in a very sophisticated way, like, this is an example of why this character's not good, and then other people just totally bash her and say she's absolute garbage and all that stuff. And, my thing, though, with that is, I've played this character, I've wrecked as this character, I've gotten massive, KO counts and all that sort of stuff, and I've seen other people completely destroy with this character. And that really got me thinking about how in Magic, I feel like that happens a lot with like specific cards. How people have this whole elitist mentality to be like, these cards are bad and these cards are good and this is what you should play. And I think what really that comes with is like this everything is like black and white mentality, like these cards are bad, these cards are good. And listen, I'm sure we could all look at Magic cards that we all think are just garbage and be like, this card's really bad. And I think a lot of us could really come to terms with a lot of that. And really though, ultimately what I was thinking is that that's not true. I feel like with some things, like with builds, for example, I feel like, yes, it happens with individual cards, but I feel like a lot of times it happens with decks. Like, people try to do this thing, and they've done this in Paladins, and I'm sure they do it in Overwatch and, in Magic, where they do like tier lists. They're like, these are the tier decks, these are the best decks, and if you're not playing one of these decks, well, you're probably sucking and you're probably losing. However, we have probably all seen people who are not playing top tier decks, who are probably just happen to be wrecking with those sort of things. So, like, let's take, like, a tournament, for example, and, you go into this tournament and you're playing a deck that's, like, not very traditional, or even if you're playing a traditional deck, maybe you're, like, spicing your deck up and you're throwing in some cards that are kind of going to throw people off. That gives you such an edge and such an advantage, and it makes it so your opponents are they're really hard to sideboard against you, and they kind of like stumble because they're like, oh, I was expecting them to play this card, but like they're not playing this card, they're actually playing this card, and that's kind of that kind of makes it so it's a lot harder for them to play against you, and totally gives you the edge over them. Like, if you're running, like, okay, for example, I don't like the card Tarmogoyf, and, I have ideas to build, like, an Abzan build, and so when I go down the line and I build Abzan, I'm not running Tarmogoyf, and so that, like, throws people off when they're like, where's that Goyf? And I'm like, guess what? It's not there. So I think it's really important to encourage people to play variations of different decks and not do the same traditional decks all the time, because I just think that gets super boring. And I think if everyone is running like the same thing, and that's one reason I have to say though, I feel like what I don't like about Standard is I feel like Standard is so mechanical, and I feel like it's so like, this is the best deck, and if you're not playing it, you might as well just like go away and not even play. And that's one reason I just get the vibe from Standard that that's what it's like. And also, too, because you're playing with such a limited amount of cards. But when you kind of think about it, isn't Modern kind of like that? You have so many cards to choose from, but someone, whoever this person was, or multiple people said, these are the cards that are actually considered good, and if you're not playing in with these cards, you might as well not play at all. or your deck is less superior or whatnot. But ultimately, I've seen people who come, so with that top 8, it's not top 8, with that tournament example, you come in and you're playing a less traditional deck, it gives you the edge and it gives you the advantage because people have a harder time because they're not expecting that type of deck. And also, too, think about it with sideboard as well. Sideboard is it's so crucial and it's so important. And with sideboard as well, you only have 15 slots. And what kind of makes it difficult is, say, for example, you're at this tournament, you're like, I'm expecting a lot of, like, blue-white control. So I have a bunch of anti-blue-white control cards. And I'm also expecting, these 5 main decks. And you sideboard for those. But then someone comes in with a deck that that isn't like that. That throws them off when they're sideboarding, and they're like, I'm not exactly too sure, like, how I'm supposed to sideboard because I wasn't really anticipating seeing your type of deck. Now, that ultimately isn't a fault of anyone. I think that regardless of what deck you're playing, sideboarding is an incredibly difficult period, unless you're, again, going with those traditional types of decks. But yeah, so ultimately I think really what should happen is that I don't like that whole elitist mentality, like, kind of that, like, what's it, like, that if you're not doing this, then you're not doing well, that, like, whole if-then statement. I don't like that, and I think that should ultimately be fixed, really. And I think, too, as a YouTuber or as, like, a veteran player, I think it's a part of, like, your responsibility, because for new players, like, we don't want to spoil them and not spoil them, but we don't want to, like, give them bad vibes from the game, basically, because, like, with, like, that game Paladins, for example, like, another thing, too, is, like, people keep criticizing people who are, like, just starting out in the game, and they're like, all these people are, like, bringing my team down, because it's, like, a team-based game, so, like, you're paired with, like, 5 people, well, it's, like, you and 4 other people, and you go, like, 5v5, and they're, like, complaining, like, all these people suck, like, whatever, and it's just, like, I feel like it's kind of like the blame of like responsibility to be like, it's their fault, like it's not my fault, like looking at yourself for like how you're responsible. But no, I think that's like that whole negative like mentality, because like new players can like look at that and be like, this is a really negative community, like I don't want to be surrounded by an elitist community where everyone's complaining because I accidentally hit the wrong button and everyone's jumping down my throat like I'm a sucky player. So ultimately I think it's our job to really set a good example, especially for like newer people and for newer people in the community, because if you're treating, if you have an elitist mentality and you're like bringing that to a newer player and like they adapt that mentality, and then it's like this whole like circle of life thing, and it's like, why do we want that? Why do we want our mana base filled with such like negativity? Like why do we want people to think that there's only one way to build a deck? Like that to me just doesn't make sense. And honestly too, like I always think too, when people build decks, they always think that that's the be all end all, like you can't change it. Like one of my things when I'm collecting all these cards, like for building, a couple of different types of decks, is I want to change my deck frequently. Not like frequently, but like I want to change it and I want to try new things and I want to see like what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I think that's like a huge part of it that I feel like a lot of people don't think like that. Like, just because like I top 8 with a deck doesn't mean like that there's not room for improvement. But I feel like some people get so sucked into these deck lists that like this is the only way that a deck is supposed to look. And it's like, what if there's some other innovator out there who's like, wait, I know everyone's been running this card, but like what about running this card? But then everyone like tells them that it's an awful idea, that they're never gonna win, and then they're like, they either like try the thing and it ends up working and then it changes the way like a deck is being played, or that person's like, what, never mind, all these people think that this deck list is so set in stone and like it can't ever change, and I'm just not going to change the deck. I'm not going to go and change my deck, and I'm not going to make any changes to the format, basically, in the way that like these decks look like. And I think it's really not fair. I think it's really unfair to have that sort of mindset that it can only be done in one way. I don't like that. Like that example that I gave you with Paladins, to say that one character's Sky is always bad, but then you look and you have people who do really well with that character. So it's like, what does that mean when the person says that, but then they end up doing well? Like, what does that mean? How does that happen if you have such strong feelings and so many people in agreement, that deck is bad, or that character's bad, and then someone does really well with it? That just doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. So ultimately, I think I really, in my video my other real talk that I did recently about like being more relaxed, I would say, when I play, in terms of like being a lot more positive. I think that's like one goal for myself, and like one challenge that I'm gonna have to face is not being as aggressive when I play, in terms of, you know, treating my opponents definitely a lot nicer. Never done anything like outright outlandish, but there have been some things where I've been like, moments where I've been like, I'm not super proud of like how I handled that situation or how I talked to that player. I was super negative that game. And I definitely don't want to be like that anymore. I want to try getting being a lot more positive in this year, and really just open to ideas, and open to change, and open to people doing new, crazy, innovative things. Like, someone brings a new idea to the table and it's like automatically shut down, and like, I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's right. Again, I think that a lot of us can argue that like some cards are really bad and really can't see, you know, the light of day. They can't really be played, but you know, there's definitely a lot of really fair stuff. And I think I'm going to try a lot of that out with my own experimentation. You know what I mean? And I think in really all of my deck techs that I've really done in here, I always feel like I try to do things that are a little bit different, because one, I feel like it'd be fake if I was trying to be like everyone else's deck, because it's just not who I am, and that's not what I want to do. It's not the kind of message I want to come across when I build decks. So, guys, that was it. That was it for this real talk on elitist mentality. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about, you know, player base, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. Look forward to hearing you guys in the comments, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.